State and local leaders throughout the United States had succeeded in easing some of the unrest in their states after the brutal murder of George Floyd. However, things have now become a little more escalated, a lot more escalated, since Donald Trump decided to exploit these protests for his own political motives, for his own political agenda. He has begun to send federal agents to various cities. We've covered Portland extensively, but now Trump is actually sending federal agents to more cities, and violence and outrage has followed. So according to the New York Times, the scenes on Saturday night, just this past weekend, in places like Seattle, Oakland, California, and Los Angeles, recalled the volatile early days of the protests after the death of George Floyd at the end of May. And let me be clear, as we experience with Portland, at least based on what the local politicians said there, they did not ask for federal agents to show up. Now, there's been a little bit of inconsistency when it comes to Mayor Ted Wheeler. We've talked about that, but for the most part, these elected officials are saying, no, we don't want these federal agents here because they're causing a lot of problems. So in Portland, there have been militarized efforts to squash the protesters, which helps the public visualize the exact type of excessive force they've been demonstrating against. The actions of federal agents in Portland also inspired demonstrations in other cities. So Mayor Jenny Durkin from Seattle just recently said, there is no question that the actions in Portland have escalated things, not just in Seattle, but nationwide. Also, over the weekend, dozens of people were arrested in Seattle. Protesters in Los Angeles clashed with officers in front of the city's federal courthouse downtown. Police also made arrests at protests in smaller cities such as Omaha, Nebraska, and Richmond, Virginia. So again, things are escalating specifically because of the actions that Donald Trump has taken. And what I want to show you next is an example of what people have been dealing with during these protests. This next video features a Vietnam veteran. His name is Mike Hasty, and he was serving as an army medic in Portland when he was treated like this.
We murdered people. We did it every day. And your generation doesn't know that. You don't know that. So that's why this Vietnam veteran, combat medic, who took injured and dead soldiers off the helicopters, this is why I did that. Well, I took an oath to defend my country. And then when I got to Vietnam, we committed atrocities. We committed atrocities every single day when I was in Vietnam. I took an oath to defend this government. And when I got to Vietnam, we committed atrocities. I stood next to a ditch in Vietnam and we murdered 170 Vietnamese people.
So there you have a Vietnam vet who was sprayed in the face with pepper spray for doing nothing more than speaking his mind. He didn't do anything physical or threaten these federal agents, but they treated him the way that they did. And I just want to say, Emma, that he displayed such courage there because even after they sprayed him, he wouldn't let up. He was still speaking his mind and speaking the truth.
I love that. Of course, it's difficult to watch as he gets sprayed in the face in a nonchalant way, in a way that the Fed probably thought wouldn't get caught on camera, but it certainly was. And it's just another display of patriotism that we're seeing with all these protests. And so if you were actually being logical about this, right? The logical solution would be that you can see the federal troops, the federal officers are only escalating things. The fact that they have a presence there is making things worse. People are retaliating because there is a federal presence there. And then it just keeps getting worse. But the Trump administration isn't thinking logically, they're thinking politically. They're thinking, how can I make this law and order narrative sell better? And that's to stick troops, basically, federal officers onto protesting citizens. And I read this great article where they talked about why go to Portland first. And the author, or I think one of the people quoted, hypothesized that it's because it's a majority white city, and so you can more feasibly make the case that these are Antifa, pink-haired lefties. This isn't actually Black people in the streets. And I mean, I think we're kind of seeing some of that in Seattle as well, and some of the smaller cities that they're targeting. They're not going first after Black people because this is a propaganda project. This doesn't have anything to do with law and order. And as I mentioned before, as you mentioned, it is the federal officers, it's their presence that is escalating everything. Here's a thought, maybe just let them peacefully protest, but that would be too logical.
Right, exactly. And part of the reason why they're not allowing them to peacefully protest is because the local police in many of these cases had their unions reach out to the federal government and ask for this type of so-called assistance. But what we're seeing is not assistance. We're seeing an escalation of violence. We're seeing federal agents engage in behavior that should be deemed unconstitutional by federal judges at this point. And I don't want to blame all of the brutality on federal agents, because in the case of Seattle, there were local police who also carried out acts of violence, which is the case in the next video we're about to show you. There is a registered nurse. She's wearing scrubs. She's not doing anything to provoke anyone. And unfortunately, she's met with violence at the hands of local police in Seattle. Take a look. And let me just note that according to the New York Times, and many of you already know since it's been talked about even on this show, that in June, the Seattle City Council banned the use of tear gas and other crowd control tactics, including pepper spray. The police chief objected, and the DOJ intervened with a lawsuit, winning a temporary restraining order blocking implementation of that ban. Over the weekend, Seattle officers used pepper spray and flash grenades to disperse protesters. And so a question I have for you, Emma, because I totally agree with you that Trump is doing this for political reasons. He thinks that it's somehow going to help him in his reelection campaign. But most people who see his campaign ads where he's saying that he's the law and order president, and if someone like Joe Biden gets elected, then this is the kind of civil unrest people are going to experience. But the imagery in those ads are from the Trump era. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, we're experiencing that unrest right now, and Donald Trump's reactions to it have only further escalated brutality, violence, the very issues that these demonstrators have been protesting against. And if you look at polling in regard to Black Lives Matter as a movement is more popular today than it was when it first began. And part of the reason why is because this imagery makes it abundantly clear that American citizens who are doing absolutely nothing but practicing their First Amendment right in many of these cases are being met with brutality at the hands of the government.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And that's part of the reason why Trump is failing so thoroughly in polling. The narrative doesn't pass the smell test, but what does he have anymore? All he can do is rile up his base with the law and order talk, the racist red meat, which goes hand in hand in this instance, because the economy's in shambles. We have 30 million people who are unemployed officially. It's higher than that. Evictions are about to go off. There's about to be a wave of evictions throughout the country. People have lost their health insurance. Unemployment's about to be reduced at the very least, if not completely eliminated, if Congress doesn't get its act together by the end of the week. These are daily realities that people are dealing with, and they wake up and their grandmother's in the hospital with COVID-19. No amount of obfuscation, changing the narrative is gonna change that for people. But Trump is trying because it's the only card that he has left. And this is just one of those instances of that. And I will point out too, we talk about how, these cities are so liberal and stuff. In Seattle, a judge recently just ruled against 3 Seattle papers, I believe, and they're forcing them to turn over images and video and audio that the reporters used at the Black Lives Matter protests in order to crack down on looting, rioting, whatever the government is saying. So we always have to be a check on government power, no matter if it's in a liberal city or a blue state or whatever, because when you're in power, you're gonna abuse that if it's allowed. There are very, very few people, elected officials, who have the moral fortitude to never do something like that. So this is just, an instance of, in Portland, we saw there was some hypocrisy with the mayor there, and also in Seattle. It doesn't matter how hippy dippy and blue the city or state is. You have to be a check on people in power.